one of his final interviews, Cesar Millan said something that still catches people off guard, that he believed his dog daddy chose the moment of his own death. Almost as though he wanted to protect Cesar from losing him at the exact same time his father was going under the knife. It sounds like something out of a legend, but it's not. It's just one small thread in a far larger and more complicated story. Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan didn't come to an end because it ran out of material. It fell apart under the weight of serious controversy. A string of lawsuits that began before the show had even completed 2 seasons, and a deeply personal crisis that nearly took Cesar Millan's life. For nearly a decade, he was one of the biggest names on television. A man who could walk into someone's home and settle a dog the owners had long since given up on. But beneath all that success, pressure had been quietly accumulating for years. Allegations about his training methods, pushback from animal welfare organizations, a legal track record most of his fans never knew about, and a private breakdown that came dangerously close to destroying him. So what really brought Dog Whisperer to an end? And how did the man who taught the world to stay calm end up losing control of his own life? Cesar Millan was 21 years old, standing at the U.S. border with $100 from his father and a plan that most people would have called foolish. He had grown up in Culiacan, Mexico, watching American shows like Lassie, and by the time he was 10, he had made up his mind. He was going to become the greatest dog trainer in the world. On his grandfather's farm, he noticed that dogs responded to him in a way they didn't respond to others. He never chased them or raised his voice. He simply moved with a quiet steadiness and let each dog figure out on its own that there was nothing to fear. It always worked. Veterinary school wasn't a realistic path. His family couldn't afford it. So he set his sights on Hollywood instead, where the world's best trainers operated. On December 23, 1990, he told his mother he was leaving, boarded a bus to the border, and crossed, fully aware of what he was risking. He arrived in California speaking almost no English, with no connections and money that would barely last the week. He briefly found himself homeless in San Diego, sleeping in a dog kennel after talking his way into a job there. The dogs, he later joked, ate better than he did. He eventually made his way to Los Angeles, built a dog-walking business strong enough to earn a feature in the LA Times. And that's how he found his way to the city's wealthy dog owners. He had no formal methodology, just instinct. His connection to Jada Pinkett Smith came about the same way. He trained a dog for someone in her circle. She watched him work, and she became a believer. Then she said something that would alter the course of everything. If he wanted a future on television, he needed real English, the kind that reads through a camera. She sent a tutor to his apartment the very next day. He studied with total commitment, deliberately avoiding Spanish-speaking communities so that English would become something he actually thought in. In 2002, he opened the Dog Psychology Center in South Los Angeles, a rehabilitation facility for severely aggressive dogs. That same year, a newspaper profile caught the attention of MPH Entertainment, and a television pilot began to take shape. Even the show's title became a source of conflict. In 2006, his former publicist sued him and National Geographic, claiming she had come up with the name Dog Whisperer and that he had taken it straight to the network without her. It was a strange, almost petty dispute for a show still in its first season, and an early preview of how frequently Millan's name would end up entangled in litigation over the next 15 years. Dog Whisperer premiered on National Geographic Channel on September 13, 2004, and it landed almost without a sound. No major marketing push, no prime-time slot. None of that mattered. Word of mouth accomplished what the network's promotional efforts never attempted. By season 6, he was drawing around 11 million viewers per week in the US alone, broadcasting across more than 80 countries. The Wall Street Journal later reported that nearly half of American consumers could identify him by name on sight. A man who had crossed the border without documentation was now instructing millions of people on how to communicate with their dogs. And it was working. But the scientific community had been watching closely, and they were not impressed. Millan's approach centered on what he called calm, assertive energy. The notion that dogs view the world through the lens of a pack structure, with a leader at the top, and that a dog acting out is usually filling a leadership void the human has failed to occupy. It made for extraordinary television. Watching a dog that had terrorized a household for years settle down in a single session felt like witnessing a live magic trick. The trouble was that the science had been pushing back against that framework for decades before the show ever aired. In 2006, a Tufts University veterinary behaviorist wrote directly to National Geographic, arguing that the show had set dog training back by 20 years. Animal behavior writer Mark Durr made a comparable argument in the New York Times. The American Humane Association formally requested that the network pull the show, describing the methods as inhumane. By 2009, the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior had published its own position statement, one that stopped short of naming Millan, but made clear exactly who it was aimed at. What they were fundamentally challenging was dominance theory, the belief that dogs are perpetually competing for alpha status. The wolf studies that gave rise to that theory, it turned out, had been conducted on captive wolves thrown together artificially in a zoo enclosure, not a genuine family unit. When researchers later observed wolves in the wild, they found that leadership emerged naturally from parents raising their offspring, not from violent competition. The entire alpha dog model had been constructed on a scenario that simply doesn't occur in nature. That criticism eventually crossed the Atlantic. In 2012, British television host Alan Titchmarsh confronted Millan on daytime TV with footage he claimed showed Millan striking a dog in the throat. Millan called it a touch, not a strike. He had seen his methods work on dogs no one else had been able to reach, and he viewed his critics as people who understood the theory perfectly well but had never had to face a genuinely dangerous animal in real time and make a split-second call. He had a point, but advertisers pay attention to controversy, and networks pay attention to advertisers. That calculation was beginning to shift. Academic criticism was one kind of pressure. The lawsuits were something else entirely. The first arrived in May 2006. A Hollywood producer sued Millan and the Dog Psychology Center, claiming his Labrador had been choked with a collar and forced onto a treadmill during its stay, leaving the dog injured and requiring surgery. In 2015, a Florida nurse sued after being attacked by a dog just 6 days after it was released from the Millan Center. Millan was eventually removed as a defendant in that case. The most dramatic lawsuit came in 2021, when a gymnast sued him for $850,000, alleging that his pit bull had attacked her years earlier and that he should have recognized the danger, since the dog had reportedly already killed one of Queen Latifah's dogs at the facility. Millan denied the allegations. The case was settled outside of court. None of these cases ever resulted in criminal charges, but National Geographic's legal team had been keeping a running tally long before any of it made the news. Then came the incident with the pig. During a taping of Cesar 9/11, a dog in training nipped a pet pig named Simon on the ear. The clip spread rapidly online, stripped of all context, and LA County's Department of Animal Care and Control opened a formal animal cruelty investigation, issuing a 24-hour notice to the center. No charges were filed, but the headline lingered for years, long after the story itself had been corrected. Despite all of that external pressure, what hit Millan hardest was the year 2010. A year that arrived like a series of hammer blows with no room to breathe between them. In February, Daddy died. He was a 16-year-old pit bull who had been Millan's most essential partner on the show, so naturally calm that Millan used him almost as a living embodiment of balanced energy. For months later, his wife of 16 years filed for divorce. The one steady, private center of an otherwise very public life was suddenly gone, and the ground gave out beneath him. He later described sinking into a deep depression, losing significant weight, and feeling as though he had lost the most important thing in his existence, his family. He called it the lowest point of his life emotionally and psychologically. The man who had spent a decade teaching others to project calm could find none within himself. The distance between the version of himself he showed the world and the reality he was living became impossible to bridge. He attempted to take his own life, overdosing on pills, and was found unconscious before being taken to the hospital. He survived. In the aftermath, he chose to work through the depression through physical activity rather than medication, channeling himself back into work. He has since said the experience, painful as it was, made him more resilient and changed how carefully he watches for signs of depression in his own sons. The show continued through 2011 and 2012, but those close to the production knew it was no longer the same program. Dog Whisperer officially concluded in September 2012, after 9 seasons and 162 episodes. Millan announced it on Facebook, thanking his fans and saying almost nothing about the real reasons it was ending. The truth was a combination of factors that had finally outweighed what the network was willing to carry. Ratings weren't in freefall, but they were declining. Production costs had climbed steadily over 9 seasons, and the controversy never went away. Every season brought renewed coverage of the same old argument, and each round made the show a worse match for a network whose entire identity was built on scientific integrity. That tension was never going to resolve itself in the show's favor. And underneath all of it was a man who had survived a suicide attempt during the show's run, who was navigating a divorce and grieving the loss of his most important animal companion. A private weight that everyone on set could sense, even if it never appeared on screen. The end of Dog Whisperer did not end Cesar Millan. By that point, his books, including Caesar's Way, had sold a combined 2 million copies across 14 languages, and a companion magazine he had launched in 2009 would continue publishing until 2014. He and his then-wife had founded what is now the Cesar Millan PAC project, funding shelters and spay-neuter programs. He took the energy of the show on the road with live stage performances, working with shelter dogs he had never met in front of live audiences, with no editing room to smooth over anything. In 2014, he launched Cesar 911. In 2015, he moved into children's programming with Mutt and Stuff, featuring his son Calvin. In 2017, he appeared alongside his older son Andre in Cesar Millan's Dog Nation. He built a YouTube channel that surpassed 1 million subscribers and proposed to his now wife Jahira Dar in front of the Acropolis, after telling her the trip was to Italy. In 2021, he returned to the very network that had ended Dog Whisperer, this time with a new show focused on something the original rarely had space to explore: the human side of the problem. He remained prominent enough to attract a strange modern footnote. In early 2025, viral videos falsely claimed he had been sentenced to life in prison on animal cruelty and fraud charges. No such conviction exists, but the speed with which the story spread says something about how much residue the original controversy left behind, more than a decade on. So what actually killed Dog Whisperer? The scientists, the network, or the private collapse that no camera ever captured? Somewhere in Santa Clarita, a 70-year-old rehabilitation center still operates every day, full of dogs nobody else wanted, run by a man the experts said should never have had a show. He never needed the show to keep going. He just kept going.